So, Berto, did you see the new documentary on Amazon called You Cannot Kill David Arquette? Did you watch it?
I did.
Well, let's talk about it because I think there's some psychology-related things to say.
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I sew lucha libre masks.
David Arquette, what do you know about him prior to watching this documentary?
I know his sisters from before I knew him, and then, of course, Scream, the Scream series. He was Officer Dewey or Davy or Doofy.
Yeah, I mean, I never watched, I think I might have seen the first Scream movie, and he was big in the mid-'90s. He was like gigantic, right? He married Courtney Cox.
Right.
Right, his sisters are Patricia and Rosanna. And it was funny because up until this point, I didn't know all three of them were siblings. I just figured, well, maybe they're cousins or...
Same last name, but...
Yeah, or same last name. Because Rosanna Arquette from Desperately Seeking Susan seems way older than David Arquette. But anyway...
He was the baby, right?
I guess so.
Yeah.
So I sort of missed out. To me, he's in that class of Hollywood stars like Jamie Kennedy. There's that kind of
right.
Like I feel like if I was 10 years younger, I would know David Arquette's full IMDb category, repertoire. So if you don't know, David Arquette, he was big in the mid-'90s. Married Courtney Cox on Friends, and he was arguably one of the biggest stars at the time. And then at basically the height of his fame, he decided he wanted to be in wrestling, WWE, that kind of thing.
Which, by the way, did you know this? I had never heard of this.
About David Arquette doing this?
Being wrestling. I mean, I might have,
No.
I don't remember consciously knowing David Arquette did wrestling.
Well, I don't know any wrestling. I never watched wrestling. Did you watch wrestling?
I watched wrestling in the 80s and the early 90s.
I had a vague understanding of Hulk Hogan.
I loved it, man. When Hulk Hogan was there and the British Bulldog and Andre the Giant, all those, I was big into it.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I've gone to it live. I was able to walk all the way up to ringside and just watch, standing there watching what was happening. It was pretty cool. It was very entertaining. And then after that, I started getting into local wrestling. So Seattle, most towns have a little wrestling scene. And did I ever drag you to that?
You tried. You're like, do you want to go? And I was like, I have a haircut that night.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. And the thing that you see, and you see this in this documentary, is that even at lower levels, perhaps even more so, the physicality and the danger and the sacrifice that these people go through is severe. I mean, the local Seattle wrestling scene, the things that these people do, it's just incredible, for such, I'm guessing, low pay. It's like you and me deciding to join a band and then we're, putting our heart and soul into playing in front of 5 people. It's a similar kind of world.
And breaking your back in the process.
Yeah. And I kept thinking of Andy Kaufman, of course, from Taxi, and how at the height of his fame, very similar situation to David Arquette. Because it wasn't like David Arquette was like mildly into it. He was playing the whole role. He was, doing all the speeches in between the matches. If you didn't know he was famous outside of wrestling, you would just think, oh, he's just one of those wrestling guys who, puts on a show, And by the way, the whole time I was watching it, so, if you want to watch it on Amazon, we're going to spoil it, but it's not really spoilable, really. But I kept wondering, at what point are they going to acknowledge that this is all fake? It's 2 things. One is that it's fake. It's scripted, if you will, meaning that they know who's going to win. They do all the moves beforehand. It's a dance. It's essentially like a choreographed dance. Maybe there's some improv in there, but it's essentially a dance. But you also see that it is real in the way that it is. There's a lot of pain, and
these are athletes.
Yeah, well, but not only athletic, but you can only fake so much. When you get drove into the thing, it's somewhat safe, but you clearly see in this documentary that either mistakes can be made or things can go a little too far. And there's blood. I mean, there's that scene with David Arquette where his neck is just gushing blood and he has to be taken to the ER. And
which, by the way, did you catch when they're showing that scene the first time? Because they show the sequence, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and I'm so focused on the neck. And then when they said a little bit later, they're like, and then Luke Perry died.
Right.
And it's ironic because he was the one helping it, and they show the same scenes, and I'm like, oh my God, how did I not notice Luke Perry was standing there the whole time?
Right.
It was bizarre and tragic.
Yeah, right. So the documentary is mainly about David Arquette and how he was very famous, top of the world, and he goes into wrestling. And then his career just basically ended very fast. And it was, at least the way the documentary lays it out, he was a joke in Hollywood kind of to begin with anyway, because he wasn't considered to be a serious actor. He was, his roles were kind of goofy. And he's kind of a goofy guy, And then when he went into wrestling, he lost a lot of respect as well.
They're saying like his first few roles were actually like legit roles, but then because he did like the Scream thing and then a whole bunch of crappy movies, then he got definitely typecast as like just this goofy weirdo.
Right. Which a lot of actors would die for that career,
sure.
But what is the problem is to rise so fast, to marry one of the people on Friends. I mean, you are at the top of the chain at that point. And then, they showed him, he was like cover of GQ with Leonardo DiCaprio and Matthew McConaughey. He was considered to be one of the greats of that generation. And then to just completely not, he can't get any roles anymore and this sort of thing. And they also talk about how when he went into the wrestling world, they let him win the championship, in one of the matches. So for a couple of weeks, he was the wrestling
heavyweight champion.
Yeah,
it's so ridiculous.
In that, WW something.
Yeah,
and the fans hated him, which is good drama, but they hated him for decades later as well. Like people held a grudge against him, which I find just to be so weird. It's like, you realize that he didn't win. Someone wrote a script so that he would win. They, the people who lost signed off on the script prior to going on stage.
But it's a little bit like when we get upset about Star Wars inconsistencies, right? It's like, hey, it's all fake. Why would you care?
Yeah.
We're like, well, you got to have certain bounds to your fakery.
Well, I immediately thought about that. I was like, I can't judge because, after watching episode 9, I hate J.J. Abrams and the other guy that wrote it.
But it's all fake.
Yeah, but it's all just a made-up world. Like, what's it to you? And so, I get it for sure. But, he's really sad by that. And then they kind of go into his self-destructive ways. He was an alcoholic. He did some recovery. He had a heart attack.
I didn't know any of this stuff.
Yeah, and he's almost exactly my age, by the way.
Okay.
So, he had a heart attack at, mid-40s.
So he lived pretty hard up until that point.
And then, he wants to get back into wrestling, presumably because his acting career is basically over. And he keeps talking about how he wants to prove himself to the fans because the accusation was he was an interloper who just came in, because he was famous, pulled some strings, got the championship, and it sullied the wrestling world. And so he wanted to prove that he was legit. And so he starts from the bottom, trains, works his way up.
I could just hear, rising up, back on the street.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Little montage.
And, they kind of go into how he suffers from depression and anxiety. His wife says, he's in a constant state of anxiety. He can never calm down. And you certainly get that sense that he has a hard time slowing down. They talk about his history. His mom was very abusive. His parents were kind of chaotic. Yeah. And he talks about how he doesn't want to grow up. He has a very self-critical voice in his head. He said he started drinking a lot because he was unhappy. And then he said something that was very interesting, Humberto. I feel like you might be able to relate to this. He said, I'm sick of being the joke. If you're part of the joke, though, then it's not so painful. Hollywood doesn't take me seriously. The media thinks I'm a joke, but they haven't seen what I can do in the ring.
Right.
Can you relate to that, Berto?
Yeah, I mean, so basically that feeling of if you're hanging out with some people, let's just take it at the micro scale, right? So I'm hanging out with some friends. If we're all joking together, it's all fun and games. But if you're the butt of the joke constantly, then that's not fun and games, because you're like, well, I mean, they're laughing, but I'm not laughing, And I think that then to blow it up to his context, I think it's probably similar with Paulie Shore, actually. If you think about it, Paulie Shore, when he was at the height, he was this guy on MTV, and he was in all these movies like Encino Man and all these things. And he had this act. He was the Weasel, and it was kind of over the top and quite a bit annoying, but he was very popular. But it was a joke. And while he was at that peak of popularity, like, he was part of the joke. Like, we're all laughing with him, sort of. But then it kind of jumps the shark a bit, and then we're all just still laughing. But he's like, well, we could stop laughing now. He's like, I'm not that much of a joke. But then I was like, no, dude, you're a joke. And then time goes by, and then he doesn't get legit roles, and then he's no longer at the top of the fame. And so then this causes psychological pain. I think it might have been similar with him, right? And it was sort of a double whammy, because one, like you said, if he wanted to be a legit actor, he ended up choosing roles or whatever where it wasn't considered legit. It was like, yeah, you're funny, you're in that movie, whatever. And then switching over to wrestling, then he's despised. And sure, there's lots of heels, but there's heels that are very successful heels, and that, sure, the fans love to hate them, right? This wasn't one of those cases. It transcended the subterfuge, and all of a sudden people are like, no, you're ruining the sport, the fake sport. And then he's got that double whammy. And he said in one part when they're interviewing him, he's driving, he's like, imagine interviewing for 10 years and being told no over and over and over and over.
Yeah, auditioning.
Like, and auditioning. Well, and he said, but imagine interviewing, because it's like an interview. Right. Yeah. And I did relate to that, because, of course, in a tiny way. When he said 10 years, I was like, oh my God. Because there was that period of time when I was in between the only two jobs I've ever had, right? In 2008, and I was, or 2009, and I was interviewing nonstop. It was like a 9-month period where I was constantly interviewing for jobs, constantly working super hard, and just getting told no, 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 no. And how hard that was mentally to just be like, it's okay. I'm still cool. We're a cool essay. We can keep going. But then when he said 10 years, I was like, oh my God, that's got to be brutal. Even if you've got money, right? Because that's just like your ego is just like pummeled.
Yeah. Yeah, I talk with clients about this. They will go through that job interviewing rejection for like two months, and their self-esteem is destroyed. I also think that it has to do with, as humans, we have a bias towards, okay, am I moving up, or am I moving down, or am I moving the same, right? Yeah. And if we're always, so the ideal situation is someone like Bradley Cooper, for example, who in his 20s, he didn't get a lot of work, but he was, getting more work as an actor. In his 30s, he started to get a little bit more work. And then in his 40s, he got even more work. Right. And so I always thought that kind of trajectory is so much more life satisfying. Whereas if you David Arquette and you have like the peak at the age of 26 or something, and then it's a sharp drop off, it would have been so much better if he had almost no roles in his 20s, a couple roles in his 30s, and then in the 40s, all that fame he had when he was like 24 to 27 was spread out over his 40s.
And it accrues.
He wouldn't be as depressed. Maybe he would be as his self-esteem wouldn't be as. And so we see this a lot of times in musicians, in other kinds of fame arenas, where early success, big success, is a curse to a lot of these people, you know.
Yeah.
And as a society, we'll make fun of them, you know. We'll because to play like a small venue in Vegas is a big deal.
Yep.
But if you were Whitesnake and you used to sell out, you know, giant stadiums, and now you're playing a small venue in Vegas, you're a joke. You're a has-been. But if you never had been famous, then you're a successful musician. You know, same venue, same pay, same, you know, everything, but you're defined yourself and by society as to, well, what's the trajectory? If you were up on high and now you're low, you're a loser. But if you were on low and you're moving out your way up, then you're a huge success. You know, you and I as musicians, if some of the small venues in Vegas, we would kill to play in or to be considered good enough to play in or something, you know? So, and I can kind of relate to that with the podcast because 12 years you and I have been doing this thing.
Yep.
And we did not have any success in the first 8 years. You know, it was a very slow ramp up, right? But every year it was a little bit more successful than the last year.
Right.
And then, you know, in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, it has been increasingly more successful. And there was a time, actually, this is a little peek behind the curtain, I suppose, earlier this year, 2020, with, I don't know what was happening exactly, but we were kind of plateauing on certain measures, you know, view counts, this kind of, or listener downloads, this kind of. And I, at the time, it didn't feel very good, but I kept telling myself, but so many podcasts would kill to have our listenership and our fans and the amount of downloads that we do get and the amount of patrons we have. Like they would absolutely be happy with like 10% of what we have. You know what I mean? But because we are plateauing, I was getting demoralized occasionally. But I would have to fight that. I've said, no, Kirk, you know, remember, you knew that this day would come. Like, it doesn't just grow forever. There's got to be a plateau eventually, you know, and you just reached it. And, you know, you never knew where that plateau was going to happen, and just be happy with it. Well, then I started doing reaction videos on YouTube, and it started taking off again. So the need for me to clamp down on that thinking, you know, and so imagine if we had gone down, right? If our numbers started going down precipitously, or if they do in the future, I mean, God help us, you know?
Well, imagine if the second year, let's say we started 12 years ago, and imagine if the second year something weird happened. We get some random stroke of luck, and the podcast blows up like crazy for a couple of years.
Right.
You know? And then, man, and this is before Patreon, but whatever, let's just say it's just going gangbusters. But then it starts declining. And then imagine if for the last 8 years, it had just been steadily declining, and we were back to like...
Well, we're back to numbers. Now. Let's say we reached a point where it looks like now.
Oh, actually, great point. Like right now, which right now you're feeling like awesome. Oh my God. But imagine if it had been like so much bigger, and now it's back down to what it is now, right? And like you would feel like, oh, this is declining. It's And this, by the way, is the problem with Wall Street.
Right.
This is what plagues us. This is why we have global warming, because we always need more.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I mean, we are biased towards quote unquote progress instead of, well, what do I need? You know, what are my goals in life really? You know, be in the here and now. I don't need to define myself based on where I've come from. Why can't I just define myself based on what is happening right now? You know, and we and it's almost a universal bias that I think we have, which, you know, can really bite us in the butt. And I think it did for David Arquette. You know, he was very sad, it seemed, suffering a lot on the inside, but he's the clown because he was the clown in his family growing up. And then getting back to a bit of his, you know, upbringing was his dad was really into wrestling, and his mom was very abusive, according to the sisters. And his dad was also very youthful. You know, he would dress up in clown outfits and play the ukulele and stuff. And so David seemed to have taken after his dad and bonded with his dad after his dad died through wrestling, maybe.
Yeah. There's something I admire a lot about certain aspects of the Japanese culture, at least as I interpret it. For example, the documentary I Dream of Jiro, or what is I Dream of Sushi, or Jiro Dreams of Sushi, whatever that is.
Jiro Dreams of Sushi.
Jiro Dreams of Sushi. Okay. But the more general idea of like, look, I'm going to master a skill. My goal isn't to open the biggest franchise of sushi restaurants around the world. My goal is to make the best sushi here in my shop. And I had already reached a proficiency peak 30 years, 40 years, 50 years ago. That was really great. And this whole time, I keep just every day just trying to do just a little better. Like that, I do like.
Yeah, that's very Japanese, by the way.
Right. But that is so, like, that could save us. Because imagine if the goal the goal was still continual improvement, but not continual exponential growth. Rather, continual chipping away at imperfection to, like, just get a little better all the time. Imagine what we could do, like, if we apply that to all the aspects, right? Like, we get a little better healthcare, a little better empathy, a little better mental health all the time, just chipping away. But instead of like, well, yesterday we demolished 10 million acres of trees. What if tomorrow we demolish 100 million acres? That's pretty great.
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right, let's take a break. When we get back, let's continue talking about it. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So if David Arquette in the movie Scream were to convince everyone to become a patron, what would he sound like, Berto?
Listen, you guys, like, you gotta listen to me. It's not safe for you kids to be running around here. There's a killer on the loose. And these kind of situations, like, they make kids go crazy and they make all of us go a little crazy. And we may need, like, some mental health support around here. Like, maybe some, I don't know, does anyone, Psychology in Seattle. I just heard about this on the radio this morning in my car. Like, maybe we could all become patrons. Oh my gosh, there comes the killer. Run, kids.
So just a little bit more on this. I want to be clear that I'm not putting down wrestling when I say that it's fake. I'm not one of those people. It's like, you understand it's fake. Yeah, I've enjoyed local wrestling. I know it's fake. And yet you just hand yourself over to it in the same way that we all know that Star Wars is fake. You just hand yourself over to it. But I loved the line finally in the documentary where that one guy that he was wrestling with says, some of these guys, when they win the championship, they bring the belt home with them. And they put the belt on their wall as if they earned it. That would be like being in a play and you're the king and bringing home the crown and saying that you're actually the king.
I love that line, dude. That was such a perfect analogy.
Yeah. But, it raises this other question of the world it's different than acting. Because, when you're done with the play and you walk out into the lobby and maybe you bump into some people who watched you, you don't continue the role. No one expects you to. They're like, oh my God, you did a great job. In wrestling, someone bumps into you at the mall.
They do expect it.
They don't want you to say, you realize it's all fake, right? You realize it's all scripted. No, they don't want that.
The Hulkamania is real.
Right. The fans... It goes beyond that, and so you wouldn't have a job at wrestling if you acknowledged the fact that it's scripted. So it puts this additional pressure on the participants to brainwash themselves. The other thing is there's got to be issues for a lot of these guys. Everyone has issues, actors, wrestlers, podcasters, and the issues probably get infused into their work, right? And if you have issues with self-esteem or issues with feeling like you're a fraud or issues with anger or something, you could imagine how you would hand yourself over to the fantasy that you are a champion, because it helps your self-esteem. You know, if Adam Driver could go home and actually believe that he saved the galaxy to boost his self-esteem, you know, there's a temptation there. And I bet you anything that actors have a little bit. I mean, the little bit of acting that I did in high school, I can attest a little bit to that. I was in one play in particular, South Pacific. Do you ever see that musical, South Pacific?
I know some of the songs, but I've never actually watched it.
Younger than springtime. So the irony was, in my school, there was hardly any people of color. It was, 99% white people. And in South Pacific, it's where the United States, a bunch of white American GIs are in the South Pacific on an island fighting the Japanese. And I was one of the better singer actors, which wasn't saying much, but I was given the second lead, and I was a lieutenant in the Army or Marines. And my character falls in love with a Polynesian girl. And so I'm an Asian guy playing a white guy, and I'm falling in love with an Asian character, but she's played by a white girl.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so I have this whole song about racism, because you have to be carefully taught, you have to be carefully taught not to, fraternize with non-white people.
Oh, right.
And I'll tell you that, and my character dies about halfway through the musical, which was actually a godsend, because the first half of the musical, it's fun. You know how they kind of do that with a lot of musicals. Like the first half is rambunctious and fun, and then the second half is like slow and depressing, and it's just focused on the love story between,
that's why as a kid,
some enchanted evening.
As a kid, my mom had a VHS tape of the Nutcracker with Baryshnikov. It was like the 70s TV special, basically. But I would only watch the first half, because the second half, they had this ballet piece that was a little slower and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, the first half was a little more upbeat.
Yeah, the first half, essentially, with my character's death, it becomes kind of real, right? It's like, the first half is like, fun Marines in the South Pacific, and all the GIs are having fun, and then I'm gonna wash that man right out of my hair. There's all these fun numbers, and then I die, and then there's intermission, and then after intermission, it's all sad because Lieutenant Kip died. But I'll tell you that my character was a hero, and was a love I did all I did all the love things and the hero things. And, I got a little bit of self-esteem from that. That's what acting is. You're supposed to at least a little bit method act. You're supposed to embody it a little bit, And when my character died, there were people that were sad, other people, the other actors would say, I'm so sad that your character died. And, I felt like I was wearing a uniform, you just feel. So imagine that you're a wrestler,
right?
And you are powerful and strong, and you win the day, every now and then, and the crowd is going crazy, and before and after, and everyone wants your autograph, not as you as an actor, but you as the wrestler. You are powerful. You are loved. Everyone wants you to win. I imagine it'd be very hard to differentiate. And why would you? Especially for David Arquette, you're just like, I want that love. Yeah. And it's easy to pathologize it, but at the same time, it's like, hey, we all have needs, and might as well get it where we can get it, right?
It's got to be just like playing Santa at the mall.
How so?
I guess I'm kidding, but like the Santa guy, he's sitting there in the Santa outfit, And the kids don't want him as an actor playing Santa. They want real Santa.
Yeah.
And so, he gets that high of like, I'm real Santa to these kids.
Totally. The kind of dudes that do that job seem to me to actually feel, I mean, I don't know, but the best Santa you want to hire is someone who feels like they're Santa all year round. They're that jolly older guy who likes to, bring joy to the world. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think every Christmas season I like to watch as many Christmas movies as I can. Elf, this sort of thing. And I watched that one. What is that? Santa Claus? Yeah, the Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And this wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad movie. So a little bit more about him. So yeah, he seems like he's suffering. He seems like he actually so he was probably abused by his mom. We don't know, but the sisters certainly, were saying that.
Yeah.
And when you're abused, you will often develop physically abused, or but let's just stick to physical abuse. Sometimes you'll develop a complex around violence and violence against yourself. You might cut yourself. You might even hit yourself when you make a mistake. Oh, you're so stupid, and you punch your leg or something. Or you're so distressed that you get into a fight at a bar and you kind of want to be punched in the face. Well, he seemed to exhibit that kind of, it's hard to know, but through this wrestling, I mean, there were scenes where he didn't seem to be complicated at all about the fact that he was just being physically abused by these low-grade, unprofessional other wrestlers. I mean, the thing you learn is like the unregulated amateur wrestling world is not safe. I mean, it is not. I mean, you look at the big players, and that looks very unsafe, but you have no idea, because when you're a nobody and you're trying to get people to like you locally, you got to take it further than what they do on TV and the stuff that these people were doing. And so it seemed to me that he almost felt like he deserved to be physically assaulted and thrown around and beat up and, humiliated in that way. I mean, did it seem that way to you?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like, so there was, just like with wrestling itself, there was certainly an artifice to the movie. I could picture how it developed at the beginning was that, and it was a good idea. He's like, look, why don't we do this meta thing? I don't know if it's his idea or if he developed it with others, but why don't we do this meta thing? Because I want to get back into this thing, but we can make a documentary about me getting back into the thing. And look, the only way I can get back into the thing is to appearing to the fans like I've paid the ultimate price. And in the process, like, I'll pay like a bit of the price because that's probably the only way that I'm going to be able to do this. And so he was very out of shape. He had a heart attack, all these things. So he actually got in great shape, number one. Number two, he really did go get himself filmed getting abused physically in Mexico and all over the place. And in the process, got great footage, which makes him an empathetic, Christ-like figure in this sport. It's like, oh, look at how much suffering he's taking for us, so we forgive him.
Right.
And but there's it's mixed in with the reality. Well, he's really doing it. Like, he's not faking the blood. He's not faking the. And
well, he got good at the technique.
He got good at the.
He got good at the choreography.
At the choreography and at the meta part, because he developed a good character in the end.
Right.
It was a great arc. Like
the Magic Man.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Yeah. 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 It's interesting the way you put it. That he sacrificed. He's so desperate to get back into show business that he's like, look, people, I can take a beating. And if that's what it takes for me to get back into your good graces, and you wonder what that has to do with his parents,
Yeah.
It'd be like, I will take a beating and I'll be the joke, but I will be loved and I'll get acceptance and I'll feel okay. The other part of this documentary that after a while, I started thinking, this feels a little manipulative. It seemed, excuse the pun, a little staged.
Yeah.
Because that scene where they go to the backyard wrestling situation,
right, and
it's just like a handful of dudes, and it's literally just someone's backyard, and the ring is, jankily put together and dangerous. I felt like, okay, so that, because you needed that story arc of like, he literally started from the very bottom wrestling situation and then climbed his way up to the very, very top.
Right.
And I just felt like, I'm sure you could have gotten a little higher than that if you wanted to.
But that was why I was saying, like, it is artificial, just like wrestling.
Right.
So the movie itself was artificial, but only to a certain extent, because it's almost like, to your point, look, did he need to start at that backyard wrestling? No, of course not. But it did help make him more relatable, right? Even if you're being cynical about it, you're still like, that does look like it hurts, like he's definitely getting hurt.
Yeah.
And it gives those wrestlers, those backyard wrestlers are the fans. Those are the fans beating him up.
Right.
Going, why the hell did you ruin my sport? Damn it. Damn it.
Yeah.
And then after a while of beating him up, it's like, okay, fine. I forgive you, sort of, but you better not do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, they were beating him with long, light bulbs, fluorescent light bulbs. And then they put tacks on the ground, and they like body slammed him into the glass and the tacks.
By the way, I gotta believe that when they do fluorescent light bulbs, those can't be real, right? Because my understanding is if you inhale those gases, it's really bad for you.
I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I can't imagine that it's a healthy thing to do. And I think you also noticed that in the big leagues, they don't do that.
No. They've graduated to, that's the thing. Those big time wrestlers, they are like some of the best athletes you'll meet. Like, think of John Cena, all these guys. They're built like a tank and yet are super flexible, super
and charismatic.
They can do crazy jumps, charismatic, endurance like off the charts. Like they're amazing athletes.
Right. I mean, it's no wonder that John Cena, The Rock, some of the others got their start in wrestling, and it makes sense that all the skills that you need to be in that world would translate into acting.
Totally.
It's a similar thing to why stand-up comics will graduate into acting as well, because stand-up anyway. They're also in a commune at some point, which is interesting growing up. The last thing about psychology we'll talk about is there's that scene where he goes to his psychiatrist and they do a ketamine infusion. Did you understand that scene?
Is that real? Like they do that?
Yeah. So it's essentially a monitored, very quick medication of ketamine. And there's some evidence that procedure will, afterwards, your depression will be relieved. It's essentially, I can't remember all the data or the science, but I believe that there are certain strains or certain depression in people that is treatment resistant, they call it, and that regular therapy doesn't work, regular medications don't work. And there's several antidepressants that they will try. And if none of those things work, then they will go to ketamine, and there's various different ways of administering it. And this is one of the more severe ones.
Jesus.
And it, I don't know if it worked or not. It was definitely an interesting scene.
Yeah, it was really intense. I'm like,
yeah.
At first I thought, that's the thing, at that part in the movie, I was still undecided if the whole movie was sort of a joke. Like, what was that?
Yeah.
The movie
Joaquin
with
Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix, yeah. I thought maybe this whole thing is, because I'm like, is this real? And like when he was at the cardio doctor, that had to have been played up a bit. Like, you could die at any minute if you just get banged in the chest a little bit, you'll bleed internally.
No, I mean, the things that they were saying are true. I mean, it's not likely to happen. It doesn't happen very often, but as a physician, you're not going to say those things.
Sure. That's fair.
Because it is true,
In either case, I thought because of those things and because the movie wasn't far enough along, I thought, this guy can't be real. So when I saw that scene with the ketamine, I was still undecided. And I meant to ask you on the podcast. I'm like, is this real? I purposely didn't research it so I could help you help me.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what was happening, but I think what was happening was you saw they had several syringes of things, right?
Yeah.
So one of them had the ketamine, massive dose in that moment or some level of dose. And they also had, I think, sedatives. And you saw that as he started to kind of flip out. And you also saw the psychiatrist say, I need you to stay positive. So I think that's also part of the treatment protocol. What they found to work is that while you're being administered ketamine, if you think a lot of positive thoughts, it's also kind of true about SSRIs. They found this to be true. I can't remember all the research, but originally they thought Prozac and stuff, they call it the happy pill, right? It just makes you happy. But when you actually look at the mechanism and the research, it finds, if I remember right, and people out there don't quote me on this, that after you take the medication, your mindset will determine if the medication works or in what way.
Oh, interesting.
So what some people believe is that SSRIs, Prozac, are just a way of freeing up your mind. It sort of gets you out of a rut and leaves it open to cognitive influence, to your own mind. You can adopt a new mindset. But if you don't actively have a purposeful mindset, you can easily just fall right back into depression because if that's your habitual way of thinking and being with people.
It's like rebooting your brain, but if you still run the same crappy virus and malware, then you're screwed.
Or you just adopt a new one, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The other part that they showed here is, they did an MRI and they found some abnormalities, and the psychiatrist speculated that he had brain disease and brain damage. Sorry, and
because he had like impaired frontal lobe function a bit.
Well, so this is where the science gets a little funny, and I'm not I don't read these MRIs, but he was saying that his brain isn't connected in a typical way. This is a very difficult thing to measure, especially on an individual, because every individual brain is different. Now, there are certain things that you can generalize for sure, but I bet you anything if we actually were able to talk to a serious researcher, on MRI and brain, measurement, that there were some issues in that. I mean, if we had a way for all of us to go to a doctor and have an MRI and have them measure what's wrong with my brain, don't you think we would do it more? I mean, one, it'd be very expensive. So when you're David Arquette and you can spend thousands of dollars for a treatment that you don't really need, then I think this is what you end up getting.
And I kind of got the sense, what I imagined was that they did the MRI and then there's a couple of odd things, and the doctor might have explained them in technical jargon, and they're like, well, can you give us a quote for the documentary? Okay. His brain's not wired right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it could be. Absolutely.
It just seemed very like hand wavy.
It could be. I could see another scenario where this physician makes a good part of his money selling tickets to rich people who want to have their brain, because it's a very common compulsion of like, I need someone to scan this organ. My brain isn't working right. I need you to scan it, because we've all seen Star Trek where you scan the thing and then you instantly what's wrong. Well, we don't have the technology to do that. There's certain things you can say for sure, but given that David Arquette's brain was totally normal. I mean, you might look at David Arquette and say, like, something's wrong with that guy. But when you actually compare him to people with actual brain issues, he is completely within normal limits. And so there's this compulsion of just like, I just need to have my brain measured. And I know enough from the experts who do this sort of work that it's very hard to know exactly what in the world is happening. Now, again, like I said, there's certain kinds of generalizations you can make, but for example, I think one of the things he said was, his frontal lobe is not as active as it should be. Well, right. Under the circumstances of which the measurement was happening, because you put him in the scanner and then you ask him to think about something, or we don't know his frontal lobe, what it's doing in the real world. We know what it was doing while he was being asked particular questions, right. While he was if anyone's had an MRI, that's a very particular experience, by the way. You're lying down and you're in a giant donut thing that is making the loudest noise. Da, 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 da. Yeah. I mean, that's not a normal situation. So there's that. Plus, the way in which it measures things is it doesn't measure necessarily activity. It measures oxygen intake, I believe, oxygen use. Anyway, the point is that scene, I was just kind of like, I don't know about what's happening here, but they seem to be
about all that.
Yeah, they seem to be implying that they had basically measured that his brain was bad, and I was like, I don't know.
It seems pseudoscientific.
Yeah, well, but I don't know. I'm not one of those people. Anyway, I think the thing that I took away from this documentary was that bias of we always need to be moving upward. And I could kind of relate to that. And it's a terrible thing, a terrible bias that we have as humans, Maybe it's sort of based on, like, with our kids. The kids, they always learn new skills as they get older. They usually do. And they get bigger. And your home gets better as you get older, in the tribal lands, or whatever. Our social richness becomes more rich, and we get better with language, and people respect us more. There's a general climb as we go through hunter-gatherer societies, perhaps, and then you plop us down in the world the way we live now, and it can really screw that up. I don't know, just a speculation.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that over time, groups of animals that, well, in this case, apes, that did a little more planning, a little more saving up of resources, a little bit more organization, had an advantage. And then so kind of like self-selected for those kind of genes. And then what it means millions of years later, it's like it kind of gets a little ahead of us because we want to continue doing it, like more and more, better, more planning, more things. Right. And then in the metaphor of the modern world, the best way to plan is to get more money because, and so, maybe it was like you're saying, it's something where like it used to be somewhat useful because, hey, now we have more stuff stored for winter. We have more defenses around our perimeter. But instead it's like, how many more buildings can we build? How many more houses can I buy?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this also relates to, I'll talk with a lot of clients. I talk at, probably at least a few times a year as a pretty major issue in clients' lives where they'll take a vacation or they'll be in between jobs and they'll say to themselves, well, it's kind of like a vacation. I want to enjoy myself. I have a job lined up or I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a job. And so I'm taking a few months off and I want to enjoy myself. And people have the hardest time enjoying themselves because from what I can tell, we have a bias, or at least in our society, towards constantly being productive, whatever that means to us, right? Yeah. And we have a really hard time with long-term, quote-unquote, non-productivity. And it can be very depressing to people. And, it's almost better if you get 1 week off or 2 weeks off a year than 6 months off a year. You know what I mean? We're geared towards, and I'm kind of this way too. Like sometimes I think about, perfect vacation, and of course the quintessential vacation is like a palm tree and the beach. You have a drink with an umbrella in it, and you don't have your devices, and there's no email. And no one's breathing down your neck, and you're just staring out into the ocean. I've done that before. that is not fun to me. I get zero pleasure from that. It's windy, it's sandy, you can get sunburnt.
And the sand, it's coarse and it gets everywhere.
Literally, I actually believe that. I've experienced that. And it can be usually really hot and humid in these kinds of places. And so, and like my brain needs something to do. Like I need something to spend my time, like a game or something, a puzzle. I can't just like stare out into the ocean, And
did I tell you about my first makeout session on the sand when I was in high school?
Oh boy, no.
I didn't grow up at a beach, right? But growing up watching movies, in TV, a lot of times you see the romance scene on the beach, right?
Yeah.
So like, I was like, oh, cool. I was at Ocean Shores, and I'm with my girlfriend, and then we start making out on the ground on the beach, and immediately there's problems because like first I'm laying down, so I'm on my back, and I think her knees are like getting scraped against the sand because it's a little rocky. It's not like perfectly smooth sand or whatever, and then. So then we switch. She gets on the bottom. I get on top, and then she's complaining because like sand is falling from my hair onto her eyes, and then like now my elbows are digging into the sand, and I'm like, this is a disaster.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you're into surfing or something where you really can't do it any other place, then great. But I consider beaches to be one of the most inhospitable places you can be. But we've convinced ourselves. And the thing that I think is like, well, how many of these people actually have spent time on the beach? Because I spent a lot of time on the beach, Ocean Shores, the Washington coast.
Yeah.
And, it can be great for certain things. It's a very particular kind of environment. It feels nice to kind of look out over the water. As growing up in Seattle, I love the water, and whenever I'm away from it, I'm kind of bummed out. But just being on the beach is not, the sand can get really hot. It can be kind of hard to walk. I mean, there's just all kinds of problems. I don't understand it. I mean, anyway.
So episode 2 was actually genius.
So yeah, I think that's what it told me. It also told me that it also gave me a little bit more respect. I already did have some respect, the wrestler with what's his face, Mickey Rourke.
Yeah, that's great.
I already did have some respect for this world and the athleticism and the heart, soul, and blood, sweat, and tears you got to put into this. And so I think the documentary did that as well. I'm worried about David Arquette.
Yeah.
I wish him the best. He seems like a really nice, humble guy. Yep. I mean, he was just he reminded me of you in a number of ways. One was just like, no matter how low he was, you could just sort of see the gears turning in his head of just like, well, this is what's happening right now, and so I'm going to make the best of it.
Right.
I'm not going to make this complicated. I'm going to say yes.
Say yes, move forward.
Which isn't what a lot of people could do, particularly people who were famous in the past,
Yeah, just keep swimming, just keep swimming.
The other thing that reminded me of you is that he said, if people are going to make fun of you, it's better to be part of the joke, right? Because it's not as painful that way. And there's a sadness to that because, well, why are you being made fun of in the first place?
Right.
Is the sadness, but the strength is you make it your own strength. You get behind the power of it. And you've talked about how you do that sometimes. And
it extends beyond that literal interpretation too, because it's sort of like life is going to make fun of you. Life is going to make fun of you, and you could either let it bully you, or you could be like, roll with, be like water, my friend, All
right, everyone out there, be like water because
you deserve it.